Jonah had always been a creature of habit. Every day after work, he would take the same bus, sit in the same spot by the window, and lose himself in the rhythmic hum of the city. He worked in a tech company, writing code all day, a job that left him drained but content. His girlfriend, Emily, would be waiting for him when he got home, with her warm smile and gentle, familiar embrace. But today was different. The moment Jonah boarded the bus, his eyes fell on her. She was standing by the door, clutching the pole with an air of effortless grace. Her platinum hair shimmered in the dim light of the bus, like silver threads woven into the fabric of the universe. Her eyes were a piercing blue, unlike anything he'd ever seen. So clear and deep, they seemed to carry the weight of distant stars. He tried to look away, but couldn't. Her eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, the world around them disappeared. She smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips, and Jonah felt something stir within him. A curiosity, a magnetic pull that he couldn't quite explain. As the bus lurched forward, she moved towards him, effortlessly weaving through the crowded passengers. She stopped just beside his seat, and for a moment he thought she might ask him to move over. Instead, she bent slightly, as if to whisper something in his ear. "I've been watching you," she said, her voice soft and melodic, like a song he hadn't yet learned to hum. "You seem interesting." Jonah blinked, his pulse quickening. "Me? I don't even know you." She laughed, a sound like a gentle breeze. "No, you don't. But I think we could get to know each other." Her words hung in the air, thick with something Jonah couldn't quite place. Was it flirtation, or something more? Before he could gather his thoughts, she slid into the seat next to him, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Jonah felt his heart race. She was beautiful in a way that was almost alien. Everything about her seemed otherworldly. The way she moved, the way she spoke, the way her presence filled the space between them. "I'm Aeliana," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "Jonah," he replied, his voice slightly hoarse. Aeliana smiled again, a glimmer of mischief in her eyes. "Tell me, Jonah, what makes you happy?" It was an innocent enough question, but there was something unsettling about the way she asked it. Jonah hesitated, unsure of what to say. What made him happy? His job? Emily? His friends? "I don't know," he said finally. "I guess I like the simple things. A good cup of coffee, a quiet evening, spending time with the people I care about." Aeliana tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. Then, with a sly smile, she leaned in just a little closer. "And what if I told you I could give you something more than that? Something extraordinary?" Jonah felt a flicker of something inside him, something dangerous and thrilling, but he didn't know what. The bus reached his stop, and with a soft sigh, Aeliana stood. "Maybe we'll talk again soon," she said, her eyes glinting with a promise he didn't fully understand. And with that, she was gone. Jonah watched her disappear into the crowd, his mind spinning. What just happened? Was that a flirtation? Or was he just imagining things? He shook his head and made his way home, but Aeliana's image lingered in his thoughts, like a tantalizing mystery he couldn't wait to solve. The days after meeting Aeliana passed in a blur. Jonah couldn't shake the memory of her. The way her platinum hair had caught the light, how her blue eyes had seemed to pierce right through him. He kept expecting her to show up again on the bus, but every day, the seat beside him remained empty. He tried to push the thoughts of her out of his mind, focusing on Emily and their routine. They had a dinner planned with some friends on Friday night, a small gathering at their apartment. It was supposed to be a good, relaxing evening, but Jonah found himself distracted. His thoughts kept drifting to Aeliana and that smile she had given him, the way it felt like she knew things about him he hadn't even told himself. Then, on a random Thursday, she appeared again. Jonah was on the bus, leaning against the window, lost in his phone. He didn't notice her until she sat down beside him with that same effortless grace. Aeliana smiled at him, the same mischievous glint in her eyes. "Hello, Jonah. Did you miss me?" Jonah blinked, his heart hammering. "You again?" She laughed softly, the sound almost ethereal, like it wasn't entirely of this world. Yes, again. And I must say, I've been watching you. You're more interesting than I first thought. Jonah couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement. I don't know what to say to that. Why are you following me? Her smile deepened. I'm not following you, Jonah. I'm simply observing. You see, we have more in common than you think. And I believe that you have a part to play in something much bigger. Jonah frowned, confused. A part to play in what? Before she could answer, the bus stopped, and they both got off at the same stop. Jonah was certain he was being led somewhere, but he couldn't understand why or how. He tried to shake off the weird sense of déjà vu that clung to him. Aeliana kept pace beside him, walking with a calm, almost hypnotic stride. Tell me, Jonah, do you ever wonder what it would be like to leave behind everything you know and live for something bigger? Something otherworldly? Jonah stopped walking, turning to face her. You're not making any sense. I don't. Aeliana placed a delicate finger on his lips, cutting him off. You're worried about your life, about Emily, about everything you've built. But that's the thing, Jonah. What if what you've built here is small? What if there's something greater waiting for you, if only you could see it? Her voice was smooth and persuasive, like a siren's call. Jonah's head was spinning, and despite his better judgment, his heart raced in anticipation. There was something undeniably magnetic about Aeliana, something that made him feel alive in a way he hadn't in years. But then his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Emily. He pulled the phone out, glancing at the text. Hey, I'm so excited for tonight. Can't wait to see you after work. Smiling face with smiling eyes. The warmth of her message snapped him back to reality, and the guilt hit him like a freight train. He was standing here, alone with a beautiful woman who felt more like a dream than a real person, and his girlfriend, his wonderful, devoted Emily, was waiting for him. I need to go, Jonah muttered, his voice tense with the inner conflict. I have plans with Emily tonight. Aeliana's smile faltered for a split second, but then she recovered, her gaze intensifying. Of course, but remember, Jonah, sometimes you don't find the extraordinary. The extraordinary finds you. Before he could respond, she walked away, leaving him standing there in a daze, the weight of her words settling over him like an unfamiliar burden. That night, when he arrived home, Emily was already there, waiting with a soft smile. She kissed him gently on the lips, but Jonah couldn't shake the strange unease gnawing at him. Are you okay? Emily asked, her voice laced with concern. You seem off. Jonah forced a smile. Yeah, I'm fine. Just a weird day, I guess. But as they sat down to dinner, the nagging feeling in the back of his mind wouldn't go away. What was Aeliana trying to tell him? What did she mean by extraordinary? And most of all, why couldn't he stop thinking about her? The next few days were a whirlwind of confusion for Jonah. Emily had noticed his distance, his distracted silences. He knew she was beginning to sense something was off, but he couldn't bring himself to tell her about Aeliana. He didn't even understand what was happening to him. Was he really considering what Aeliana had said? That somehow, there was something more waiting for him than the life he had with Emily? On Monday, the usual routine resumed. Jonah caught the bus home from work, his mind preoccupied with work and the subtle tensions between him and Emily. He hadn't seen Aeliana since their encounter last week, and part of him wondered if she'd simply disappeared, like a fleeting fantasy. But when he sat down, he saw her. Aeliana was standing at the front of the bus, her platinum hair catching the last rays of sunlight as she smiled. A smile that seemed to hold secrets she was only willing to share with him. Jonah's heart skipped a beat. She was impossibly beautiful, her delicate clothes, shimmering and almost translucent in the late afternoon light, were more like something from a dream than something worn on earth. She caught his eye immediately, her gaze locking onto his as if pulling him in with an invisible thread. Without hesitation, she made her way toward him, her every step purposeful and graceful. When she reached him, she didn't sit beside him, but instead stood with one hand resting lightly on the back of his seat. Her presence was overwhelming, intoxicating. Jonah, Aeliana said softly, her voice sending a shiver down his spine. I've been thinking about you. Jonah's heart thudded in his chest. About me? Why? Her smile deepened, and she leaned in just a little closer. Because I think you've been wondering about me, too. He swallowed, trying to push past the knot in his throat. I don't know what you mean. I think you do, Aeliana replied. There's something inside you, something that's pulling you towards me. You've felt it, haven't you? Jonah's breath hitched. He couldn't deny it. The attraction was undeniable. A magnetic force that tugged at him every time she was near. But at the same time, he felt a sharp pang of guilt. He had a girlfriend. He loved Emily. Stop, he muttered, his voice shaky. I don't want to feel this way. It's not right. Aeliana didn't back away. She seemed to relish the tension, her eyes gleaming with knowing amusement. It's okay to want more, Jonah. It's okay to want something beyond the ordinary. Emily is a lovely girl, but she doesn't have what you need. Not in the way I do. Jonah opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off with a soft, melodic laugh. You don't have to feel guilty, Jonah. I'm not asking you to leave her. But sometimes, things happen in ways you don't expect. You just have to trust that the universe has a plan for you. Before he could say anything else, Aeliana sat down next to him, her delicate fragrance filling the air. She didn't speak immediately, but her closeness made Jonah's skin tingle, a heat spreading through him he couldn't ignore. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt, desire, confusion. But one thing was clear. Aeliana was unlike anyone he had ever met. You're not like other people, are you? Jonah asked, his voice quieter than usual. Aeliana tilted her head, a playful gleam in her eyes. No, I'm not. And neither are you, Jonah. You just don't know it yet. Jonah was about to respond, but the bus jerked to a stop. Aeliana stood, her movements fluid and graceful as she exited without a word, disappearing into the crowd. Jonah sat there, frozen in place, his heart hammering in his chest. The last words she had spoken echoed in his mind. You just don't know it yet. What did that mean? Was she referring to the connection they shared? Or was there something else he didn't understand? The next day, he couldn't stop thinking about her. The tension in his chest was unbearable. Emily had noticed his distraction again, but Jonah couldn't bring himself to tell her. He loved her, but Aeliana was something else entirely. That night, after dinner, Jonah found himself staring at the ceiling in the dark, his mind racing with thoughts of the woman he had met on the bus. Something was different about her. It wasn't just the way she looked or the things she said. There was something in the air when she was around, a sense of power, of mystery. And deep down, Jonah knew. He wasn't ready to let go of this mystery just yet. The next day, he received a message from an unknown number. It was a simple text. I've been thinking about you too. Meet me tonight. Jonah's pulse quickened. There was no name attached, but he knew exactly who it was. He stared at the screen for a long moment before he typed out a response. Where? The reply came almost instantly. The park. Midnight. Jonah's heart raced as he typed the next message. What do you want from me? The text that came back was brief but unmistakable. I want everything. Jonah's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the weight of the decision hanging over him, the pull between the life he had and the life she promised. One that was extraordinary, something beyond anything he could imagine. And just like that, Jonah knew his life was about to change forever. Midnight arrived, and Jonah couldn't sleep. His mind was a swirling storm of confusion, guilt, and intrigue. Emily had fallen asleep beside him, her breathing steady and peaceful. But Jonah felt like a stranger in his own body. He had promised her he would be present, that he would be faithful. But as he lay there, the allure of Aeliana's mystery gnawed at him, calling him to something he couldn't resist. When Emily's steady breathing assured him that she was in deep sleep, Jonah slipped out of bed. His feet felt heavy as he moved toward the window. The city outside was bathed in soft, silvery moonlight. The park was only a few blocks away, and Aeliana's message still lingered in his mind. I want everything, everything. He felt a chill run down his spine as he left the apartment, the weight of the night pressing in on him. The streets were eerily quiet, as if the world had slowed down, holding its breath for what was to come. Jonah's mind raced. Was this a mistake? Was he really going to meet her? Was he betraying Emily? As he arrived at the park, his heart hammered in his chest. The moon hung high above, casting long shadows that stretched across the empty paths. Jonah walked slowly, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the wind. Then he saw her. Aeliana was standing by the fountain at the center of the park, bathed in soft moonlight. Her platinum hair shimmered, like strands of starlight caught in the night. Her delicate clothes shimmered as well, almost translucent in the light. She looked like a vision from another world, graceful, ethereal, untouchable. Jonah's breath caught in his throat. Aeliana, she turned, her smile immediately lighting up her face. Jonah, you came. I don't know why I did, he admitted, his voice low. I'm not supposed to be here. I have a life, Emily. She raised a hand, gently silencing him. I know, she said softly, but you came anyway. That's what matters. Jonah hesitated. Why did you want me to come? What do you want from me? Aeliana stepped closer, her presence intoxicating. I don't want you to feel conflicted, Jonah. I just want you to understand something. She reached out, her fingers grazing his arm lightly. You're not the man you think you are. You've always had the potential for something more. Something beyond the ordinary. Jonah's chest tightened. You're talking about something crazy. I'm just a guy. I work in tech. I'm not special. Aeliana chuckled softly, the sound like a musical note floating in the air. Jonah, you are special. But you're not just the man you think you are. You're a link, a bridge between worlds. Her eyes shimmered with an intensity he couldn't look away from. My world and yours. Jonah swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking into him. A bridge between worlds. Aeliana continued, her voice growing softer, more intimate. I'm not from here, Jonah. I come from a planet very much like Earth. But on my world, we've discovered that mixing with your kind can create something incredible. Something unique. Jonah's mind reeled. Wait, what are you saying? You want me to have a child with you? She nodded, her smile never fading. Exactly. A child who will combine the best of both our worlds. A descendant who will carry the legacy of both Earth and my planet. A being with the potential to unlock the secrets of the universe. Jonah's head spun. A child? With her? But I have Emily, he stammered. I don't know what to say. This isn't real. Aeliana's eyes softened, though there was still that glimmer of something dangerous in them. It is real, Jonah. It's happening right now. What we could have. It's inevitable. You're the key. Jonah's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the pull of her words, the temptation gnawing at him. Part of him wanted to run, to go back to his life with Emily. But another part of him, a deeper part, wanted to give in. This was bigger than anything he had ever known. Aeliana stepped closer, her voice almost a whisper now. You don't have to choose right away. But soon, Jonah. Soon. The decision will be made for you. He opened his mouth to protest, but before he could, she placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. All I'm asking for is one night to prove to you what's waiting for you. After that, the decision will be yours. But know this, the universe is already aligned, and this moment right here, is only the beginning. Jonah's thoughts were a blur. His whole life, everything he knew, felt like it was slipping through his fingers. The warmth of Aeliana's presence, her proximity, felt like a drug, something that could consume him if he wasn't careful. He glanced back toward the darkened streets where he had come from, his apartment, Emily. But when he turned back to Aeliana, there was no going back. Her gaze was hypnotic, pulling him deeper into her orbit. He swallowed hard. What are you asking me to do? Aeliana's smile was all-knowing. I'm asking you to trust me. Trust that I'm offering you something you've never experienced before." And with that, Jonah knew there was no turning back. Jonah stood frozen in the moonlight, his mind teetering on the edge of decision. The pull of Aeliana was like gravity itself, undeniable, intense, and deep. She was something beyond any woman he had ever met, and her presence seemed to stretch the very fabric of reality itself. The air around them felt charged, alive with something powerful. He could almost taste the weight of her promise, the allure of the unknown that she represented. "I don't understand," Jonah whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Why me? Why do you need me to make this choice?" Aeliana's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her delicate form bathed in the soft light. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his cheek in a gentle caress, as if she could sense the confusion, the turmoil that was swirling inside him. "You were always the one," she said, her voice low and hypnotic. "You just didn't know it yet." Jonah's heart raced. The words reverberated in his chest, the weight of them pressing down on him. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can betray Emily. I love her." His voice faltered, the doubt creeping in, but the need to understand, to unravel what was happening, surged through him like wildfire. Aeliana smiled, her gaze never leaving his. There was something so calm about her, as if she had already made her peace with what was happening, and now she was simply waiting for him to catch up. "I understand your loyalty to her, but love is complicated. It's not always what you think it is. Sometimes, it's a doorway to something much greater, something that transcends everything you know. This isn't just about you and Emily, Jonah. This is about you and me, about us, and about something much larger than both of us." Jonah's pulse quickened. He wanted to believe her. The idea of being part of something bigger, of unlocking a new path that no one had ever seen, felt intoxicating. But the knot of guilt in his chest tightened, the image of Emily waiting for him back at home clouding his thoughts. Aeliana could see it. She could feel the resistance within him, the hesitation that was pulling him in two different directions. She leaned in, her lips just a breath away from his ear, her voice a low murmur that sent a shiver down his spine. "You don't have to choose right now," she whispered, each word deliberate and measured. "Just let go. Let me show you what could be, what should be. All I'm asking for is one night to prove that what I'm offering is worth the risk. After that, the decision will be yours. But remember, Jonah, sometimes the greatest gifts come when you least expect them. And sometimes, you have to trust your instincts." Jonah's mind spun. He couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her, but at the same time, the life he had with Emily seemed to anchor him. He had always thought that the world worked in simple terms: love, loyalty, choice. But now, standing here, with Aeliana's intoxicating presence wrapping around him, everything seemed far more complicated. "Aeliana," Jonah began, his voice shaky. "What happens after tonight? What if I do this? What if I go along with it?" Her eyes gleamed, the promise of something wild and unknown flickering in their depths. "After tonight, you will understand. You will see what I've been trying to show you. The universe has its own way of bringing people together. Sometimes the path is clear and sometimes it's shrouded in mystery. But I will be with you, Jonah. Always." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Time itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Jonah's answer. The weight of it all settled on his shoulders. His life, his future, his connection with Emily. It all seemed to hang by a thread, teetering on the edge of something unknown. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. "I can't make this decision alone." Aeliana's smile deepened, a knowing smile that sent a thrill through his chest. "You don't have to. I'm not asking you to make it alone, Jonah. I'm here, and I'll show you what happens next. Trust me, and I'll show you everything." Jonah's heart raced as he looked at her, the conflict still battling inside him. But in that moment, something inside him shifted, a quiet, dangerous curiosity. He didn't know where this path would lead, but the idea of stepping into the unknown, of breaking free from the life he knew, stirred something deep within him. I'll come with you, Jonah said, the words escaping his lips before he could fully comprehend them. Aeliana's eyes sparkled with triumph. Good, she whispered. You've made the right choice. Without another word, she took his hand, her fingers cool but firm, and began to lead him through the park. Jonah's feet moved almost without his consent, his mind still reeling from the decision, but his body following instinctively. The night air felt different now, charged with an energy he couldn't quite explain. It was as if the very fabric of reality had shifted, and with each step he took, he was walking into a new world, one where everything was possible but nothing was certain. As they reached the edge of the park, Aeliana turned to him, her gaze piercing. Are you ready for this, Jonah? He didn't answer immediately. He glanced back toward the distant lights of the city, the home he had known, the life he was leaving behind. And then, as if he could feel the weight of his decision settling in, he turned back to Aeliana. Yes, he said softly. I'm ready. Her smile was all satisfaction now, as though she had always known the outcome. She pulled him closer, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that was not just physical but all-encompassing. It was as if she were sealing something, a pact of sorts, a promise of what was to come. Jonah kissed her back, his mind reeling as everything he knew slipped away, and the future, one that was anything but ordinary, unfolded before him. And just as they pulled apart, Aeliana whispered, This is only the beginning, Jonah. Everything is about to change. Jonah's heart raced as he realized she was right. His life would never be the same again. The path he had chosen was one of no return, and the consequences, whatever they might be, were still waiting to reveal themselves. Jonah's body trembled as he stood there, the kiss lingering on his lips like a forgotten promise. His heart thudded painfully in his chest, and the quiet whisper of Aeliana's words echoed in his mind. This is only the beginning. But what was just beginning? What had he stepped into, and more importantly, what had he left behind? As they pulled away from each other, Aeliana's hand still rested gently on his arm, as though keeping him tethered to her. The park had gone eerily still, and the lights from the distant city now seemed dim, fading as if they no longer mattered. The world around him had shrunk, leaving only Aeliana and the sharp edge of his own indecision. Jonah opened his mouth to speak, but Aeliana placed a finger on his lips, silencing him gently. Her eyes shone with an intensity that sent a thrill up his spine. You've made the first step, she said, her voice like velvet. Now follow me, and I'll show you the world you've only ever dreamed of. A world where you can be everything you were meant to be. Jonah hesitated. The guilt was still there, a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. Emily, the image of her, the woman who had trusted him, who had loved him with such tenderness, lingered in his thoughts like a shadow. He had promised her, hadn't he? He had said he would never betray her, never let her down. But now, standing with Aeliana, everything felt different. The reality of his life seemed small, confined, like a prison he had been too afraid to escape from. I need to think, he muttered, his voice shaking. I can't forget everything like that. Aeliana's smile softened, though it held the trace of something knowing. You don't have to forget, Jonah. You don't have to choose her over me. But you will have to choose. You'll have to decide what you want your life to be. You don't have to go back to the ordinary world. There's a world waiting for you. A world where your destiny is far greater than anything you've known. Jonah's mind raced, his thoughts a jumbled mess of doubt and desire. Aeliana wasn't wrong. Deep down, he had always felt there was something more he could be, something more he could do. Emily, despite her love and support, had never truly understood him the way Aeliana seemed to. There had always been a distance between them, a subtle, unspoken divide. But was that enough to betray her? Was he willing to give up everything for a taste of the extraordinary? Aeliana reached out again, her fingers light but firm as they brushed against his arm. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something magnificent. But it's your choice, Jonah. I can't make it for you. The words she spoke were soft, seductive. yet they carried the weight of something deeper. A promise, a threat, something Jonah couldn't fully grasp. But the allure was undeniable. He could feel the pull of it, the undeniable desire to see what lay beyond his ordinary life. "I don't know if I can leave everything behind," he admitted, his voice raw. "I don't know if I can betray Emily like that. She deserves better." Aeliana's expression didn't falter, but there was a hint of something, almost pity, in her eyes. "You won't be betraying her. You'll be choosing your own path. You're not the same person you were when you first met her, Jonah. You're destined for more. This is just the beginning of your awakening." The words burned into his soul. "Awakening," he murmured. "To what?" "To everything," Aeliana replied, her smile now a slow curve that sent shivers down his spine. "To the truth of who you really are. To the universe, Jonah. And to the legacy we will create together." A moment of silence passed between them. Jonah could hear the distant hum of the city, the world moving on without him. And yet, here, in this quiet park, with Aeliana standing before him, everything felt suspended, waiting. "I need to see you again," Jonah said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I need to understand. This is too big." Aeliana's eyes softened, a gleam of something like satisfaction crossing her features. "You will, Jonah. Soon. But first we must prepare. You will need to leave your old life behind. The path ahead requires you to let go of all the things that bind you to earth." Jonah felt a pang of loss at her words, as though he were standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at the abyss that awaited him. He wasn't ready to take that step. Not yet. But Aeliana had already seen it. She knew what he was capable of, what he could become. And in that knowing gaze, Jonah felt the weight of his own potential. "Prepare for what?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "For the birth of something new," Aeliana replied. Her tone had changed, becoming more serious, more intense. "We must make a child, Jonah. A child who will bridge our two worlds. A child who will combine the best of both our races. You and I will create a legacy, and it will be a child who carries that legacy forward." Jonah's mind reeled. "A child? With Aeliana? Isn't that—" His voice faltered. "Isn't that insane? I barely even know you." Aeliana stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "What if I told you that the universe already knows us? That our meeting was destined? This child, Jonah, will be more than just the result of a fleeting moment. It will be a fusion, a combination of two worlds, two destinies. And through this child, we will have the power to change everything." Jonah shook his head, the weight of the decision still crushing him. "I don't know if I'm ready for this responsibility." Aeliana placed her hand gently on his chest, her fingers tracing the outline of his heart. "You're ready. You've always been ready. You just didn't know it. This isn't about responsibility, Jonah. This is about possibility. The possibility to create something that will change the world. And once you understand that, nothing will hold you back." Jonah closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Everything in his life, the ordinary, the safe, the familiar, felt distant now. His world was spinning, and Aeliana was the force that had tilted it off its axis. "You'll see, Jonah. Soon you'll see," she whispered. And in that moment Jonah realized something. He was already lost. He had already chosen, even if he couldn't fully comprehend the gravity of that choice. What he didn't know yet was how it would change him and the world forever. Jonah woke the next morning to the dull hum of the city outside, the light of the morning sun creeping through the blinds of his apartment. He had barely slept, his mind too tangled in the events of the night before. The memory of Aeliana's touch, her words, the promise of a future that seemed impossible, haunted him. The decision he had made, the one he hadn't even fully understood at the time, was now cemented in his chest, a burning question of what would come next. He sat up, his thoughts still whirling. Emily, his girlfriend, was still asleep beside him, her face peaceful, unaware of the world Jonah had just stepped into. He watched her for a moment, the warmth of their shared life a sharp contrast to the pull of the unknown. felt like a dream now, a distant, unreachable reality. Could he really just walk away from it all? Jonah glanced at the clock. It was already late. He had to go to work, and yet, the idea of facing his daily routine seemed almost impossible. How could he focus on anything as mundane as software engineering when his world had just been irrevocably altered? When a woman from another planet had just promised him everything: power, legacy, and a future that transcended the limitations of Earth. He didn't want to wake Emily. Not yet. He needed time to understand what had happened and time to figure out how to navigate the choice he had made. Jonah stood up slowly and grabbed his jacket, leaving the apartment without a word, slipping out into the cool morning air like a man running from his own life. The streets felt different today. The buildings seemed taller, the air crisper. He wasn't sure if it was his mind playing tricks on him, but everything looked sharper, more vivid. Even the sounds of the city, the chatter of pedestrians, the hum of traffic, seemed quieter somehow, as if the world was watching, waiting for him to make his next move. Jonah walked without thinking, his feet carrying him toward the park where he had met Aeliana. His mind raced, but his steps were steady, drawn to the same place that had altered everything. As he entered the park, the familiar surroundings of the trees and benches felt foreign now. He was no longer the same person who had walked through these paths a few short days ago. And then he saw her. Aeliana stood in the same spot near the fountain where they had met the night before. She was waiting for him, her platinum hair catching the sunlight, her delicate clothes shimmering with an otherworldly grace. She looked even more ethereal in the daylight, as though she didn't belong here, as if she were too perfect for this planet. Jonah couldn't look away. "Jonah," she said, her voice like a soft melody. "I knew you would come. I knew you couldn't stay away." Jonah's chest tightened as he walked toward her. "I'm not sure I should be here," he confessed, the words escaping him before he could stop them. "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I can leave everything behind." Aeliana's expression softened, and she stepped closer, her hand reaching for his. Her touch was cool, soothing, as if she could calm the storm that raged inside him. "You don't have to leave everything behind," she said. "Not all at once, but you must be prepared to accept that the life you knew no longer exists. The moment you opened yourself to this world, everything changed. It's already begun, Jonah. You've chosen a different path, and now you must embrace it." Jonah swallowed hard. "What does that mean? What comes next?" Aeliana smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "What comes next is the beginning of your awakening. You will see the world differently, feel differently. Your body, your mind, it will start to change. The connection between us has already started to alter your very being. You will become more than you were, more than human." Jonah shook his head. "This is insane. I don't even know how to process all of this. How could I even begin to understand what's happening?" Aeliana's eyes softened, and she stepped even closer, her presence overwhelming. "You don't have to understand it all right away, Jonah. Just trust that everything is happening as it should. I am here to guide you through it. We will do this together." Aeliana reached up and gently touched his forehead, her fingers cool against his skin. Jonah flinched slightly, but her touch was soothing, almost like a healing balm. As her fingers pressed against his temple, something strange began to happen. Jonah felt a warmth spread through his body, starting from the point of contact and radiating outward. It wasn't painful, but it was unsettling. The sensation was unfamiliar, like his body was awakening to something new, something foreign. "What are you doing to me?" Jonah whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm helping you remember," Aeliana replied softly. "Remember who you really are, the power that lies dormant within you, the potential you have always had but never realized. I'm unlocking it for you." Jonah's knees wobbled slightly, and he gripped the edge of the fountain for support. His vision blurred, and for a moment, the world around him seemed to stretch and warp. He saw flashes, images of places he didn't recognize, faces that seemed distant but familiar, and then the sense of something ancient, something vast. His mind swirled, and his heart beat faster. I don't understand, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Aeliana's face remained serene. You will, Jonah. In time, you will. The warmth that had spread through his body intensified, and Jonah gasped, his breath shallow. He could feel something awakening deep inside of him, a primal energy that had lain dormant for so long. It was as though every fiber of his being was being rewired, remade. He could feel the pulse of the universe, the connection between him and Aeliana, stronger than anything he had ever known. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the sensation stopped. Jonah's vision cleared, and the world around him returned to normal. He blinked a few times, his heart pounding in his chest. What was that? He asked, his voice hoarse. Aeliana smiled, her gaze filled with satisfaction. That was the first step. You're beginning to understand. Your body is adapting, Jonah. You're becoming something new. The connection between us has begun to take root. Jonah's mind was spinning. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. I don't know what's happening to me. Aeliana's expression softened with understanding. You don't have to know it all right now, but you will know. In time, you'll embrace it. Embrace me, Jonah. Embrace who you are becoming. Jonah's chest tightened. His heart was still racing, but now there was a part of him that knew he had crossed a line. He had made a choice, and there was no going back. What came next, he could not yet fathom, but the seed had been planted. The change had begun, and Jonah had no idea how far it would take him. Aeliana's words lingered in his mind as he left the park and walked back into the world he had once known. Jonah spent the next few days in a haze, as if the world around him had blurred into the background. His mind kept replaying the events that had unfolded since meeting Aeliana. Her touch, the strange sensations, the promises of awakening. It was like stepping through a door into another reality, one he wasn't sure he was ready for. He had tried to go back to work, to pretend like everything was normal. But the more he tried to focus on his coding, the more his thoughts kept drifting back to her. Aeliana, the mysterious woman with platinum hair and eyes like the sky, who had claimed to be from another planet. The woman who had promised him a future unlike anything he could have imagined. The woman who had changed him. But what exactly had changed? He hadn't felt any different, not physically, not in a way he could understand. Yet, when he looked in the mirror, he could see the faintest shift in his own eyes. They looked sharper, somehow, as if he were beginning to see the world differently. The edges of things, people, places, even his own emotions, seemed to be more defined, more vivid. The strangest part was how quickly his life had become divided. He had his life, the life with Emily, his girlfriend, the life he had built for himself in the city. And then he had this life, the one with Aeliana, the one that seemed to be pulling him towards something bigger, something far beyond his human understanding. Emily had noticed the change, of course. She had always been intuitive, always knew when something was off with him. Jonah, what's going on? She asked one night. As they sat at the dinner table, the food forgotten between them. You've been distant, and don't tell me it's work. You've been acting weird ever since you got back from the conference. Jonah felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He hadn't told her anything about Aeliana, about the strange connection they had shared, about the promises of a child that would unite their two worlds. How could he? She wouldn't understand. Hell, he barely understood it himself. I'm just tired, I guess, Jonah replied, trying to keep his voice steady. It's been a lot lately. Emily didn't look convinced. Jonah, I know you. Something's different. You're not yourself. Jonah's heart clenched. He wanted to tell her, wanted to open up about everything. The truth, the whole truth. But it felt impossible. The gap between the life he had with Emily and the one Aeliana was offering him was widening by the day, and Jonah didn't know how to bridge it. I'm fine, Jonah said, forcing a smile. Really, it's just, work. A lot on my plate. Emily stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his, before she finally sighed. Okay, but I want you back, Jonah. I don't want to lose you. Her words hit him like a slap. I don't want to lose you. But the question was he already lost? And if he was, could he even go back to who he was before? That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Jonah slipped out of bed and found himself walking toward the door. Without a second thought, he grabbed his jacket and headed out into the night. He couldn't sit in the apartment anymore. He couldn't hide from the truth. He needed answers. He found himself at the same park again, the familiar place where it all began. The fountains shimmered under the moonlight, and there, standing at the edge of the path, was Aeliana. She looked like she belonged in the night itself, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of the street lamps, her platinum hair catching the light like a beacon. "You came," she said, her voice lilting and melodic, as though she had known all along he would. "I knew you'd come, Jonah. You always do." Jonah felt a strange sense of peace wash over him as he walked toward her. The distance between them seemed to shrink with each step. He needed her now more than ever. He needed to understand what was happening to him, to figure out if the strange pull he felt toward her was real or just some kind of illusion. "I don't know if I can do this," he confessed, his voice low. "I don't know if I can leave everything behind, Aeliana. Emily, she doesn't deserve this. She doesn't deserve to be hurt by me." Aeliana's eyes softened with understanding, and she took a step forward, her presence overwhelming and comforting at once. "I never asked you to leave her, Jonah. Not yet. But I'm showing you something more. Something greater. You will leave behind the life you know. But it won't be because of me. It will be because you realize that you were always meant for something else." Jonah ran a hand through his hair, feeling more lost than ever. "I can't just forget her. I can't forget my life. I don't know what's real anymore." Aeliana's lips curved into a gentle, knowing smile. "That's the point, Jonah. You're awakening. And when you awaken, everything changes. What you thought was real no longer holds the same weight. Your connection with me will change you. You will see things differently. You will understand things you could never have understood before." Her words were hypnotic, and Jonah felt himself drifting, like he was losing his grip on reality. He was being pulled into something vast, something ancient. He couldn't deny the connection, the strange bond that existed between them. It was undeniable, but it was also terrifying. "Why me?" Jonah whispered, his voice shaking. "Why did you choose me?" Aeliana stepped closer, her fingers gently brushing against his cheek. "Because you were always meant to be a part of this, Jonah. From the moment we met, I knew. You and I are connected in ways that you can't yet comprehend. We will change the future together." Jonah closed his eyes, his breath coming faster. The pull was undeniable, and as he opened his eyes again, he could see the truth of what she was saying. There was something deep inside of him that had always known he was meant for more than the life he had. The life he had with Emily seemed small now, incomplete. "I don't know if I can just walk away from her," Jonah said, his voice barely audible. Aeliana's gaze hardened with something like resolve. "You don't have to walk away from her, Jonah, but you do have to walk away from everything that holds you back. This path you've chosen won't allow for hesitation. Once you accept it, there's no turning back." Jonah's heart pounded. The decision had already been made. He had already crossed a threshold, and now he had to live with the consequences. What would he choose? The life he had or the life Aeliana promised? And as the night stretched on, Jonah realized that the world he thought he knew was beginning to unravel. Jonah barely slept that night. His mind was consumed by the same questions, the same doubts, the same pull toward a future that seemed both exhilarating and terrifying. Aeliana's words, her touch, the strange shift in his body and mind. It all buzzed in his head like a persistent hum. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something far greater than himself. Something that had already begun, whether he was ready for it or not. The next morning, he woke up in a daze, his heart heavy as he stared at Emily sleeping beside him. Her presence was a comfort, a reminder of the life he once thought he wanted. The life that now felt suffocating, like a cage made of familiarity and routine. Aeliana had told him that everything would change, that his destiny was waiting for him in a place he could barely imagine. But how could he walk away from Emily, from everything he had built? He rolled out of bed and sat on the edge, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He needed space to think, to make sense of all of this. Emily stirred beside him, her eyes fluttering open. "Jonah?" she asked, her voice soft and concerned. "Are you okay?" He glanced at her, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired." Her brow furrowed slightly. "You've been distant lately. I don't like it. What's going on with you?" Jonah's stomach twisted. The guilt weighed heavily on him. He didn't know how to explain it. How could he tell her the truth when he didn't even fully understand it himself? "I'll be fine," he said, his voice unconvincing. "Just work stuff. You know how it is." Emily sat up, her gaze intense. "Jonah, please, don't shut me out. I'm here for you. You don't have to go through this alone." The words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to tell her everything, to explain the impossible things that had happened, the strange attraction he felt toward Aeliana, the promises she had made. But the moment he thought about it, the words lodged in his throat like a lump of cold stone. How could he make her understand? How could he make himself understand? "I'm not shutting you out," he said, forcing his voice to steady. "I just need some time to think. That's all." Emily studied him for a moment, her eyes searching his. She knew something was wrong, even if she couldn't name it. Jonah could see the worry in her eyes, and for a moment, he felt like he was drowning. He loved her, he truly did, but he couldn't shake the sense that he was meant for something else. Something bigger. Something that didn't involve the life he'd shared with Emily. He stood abruptly, not trusting himself to speak. "I'll be back later," he muttered, his voice tight. Without waiting for a response, he walked out of the apartment, leaving Emily's concerned eyes behind. He didn't know where he was going, but somehow he found himself on the same path he had walked the night before. The park. The place where everything had started. As he entered the park, his heart pounded in his chest. Aeliana was there, waiting for him as always, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlights. She looked every bit as otherworldly as she had the first time he saw her. Tall, graceful, her platinum hair almost glowing in the dim light. "You came," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I knew you couldn't resist the call." Jonah stopped in front of her, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. "I don't know what to do anymore," he confessed, his voice hoarse. "I'm torn, Aeliana. I feel like I'm losing myself. I don't know if I can leave her. I don't know if I can walk away from everything I've built." Aeliana's gaze softened, but there was something resolute in the way she looked at him. "You don't have to leave her right now, Jonah. Not yet. But you must understand that there is no going back. Your life as you know it is over. You are becoming something else. Something more." Jonah swallowed hard, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions churning inside him. What does that even mean? Becoming something else? I don't know what I'm supposed to be." Aeliana took a step forward, her presence overwhelming. "You're awakening to your true potential. The potential that has always been within you. The child we will have together, it will not just be the union of our worlds. It will be the union of all the possibilities that exist in the universe. Our child will change everything. And you, Jonah, will be the one to guide that change." Jonah felt the weight of her words press down on him. He could feel the pull of the future she described, a future that seemed so far beyond what he had ever dreamed of. But the price was steep. He could feel it in the marrow of his bones, the cost of stepping into this new world, this new life. "Will it be worth it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Will it be worth everything I'm leaving behind?" Aeliana's lips curved into a smile that held both certainty and sadness. "You will never truly know until you take that first step, Jonah. But know this, you will be the one to define what's worth it. You'll be the one to shape the future, to create a legacy that will live on long after you're gone. Everything you've ever wanted, everything you've ever dreamed of, is waiting for you in this new world." Jonah closed his eyes, trying to quiet the storm inside him. He could feel the pull of Aeliana's words, the weight of destiny pressing down on him. It was as if the universe itself was bending to her will, shaping him into something he could no longer deny. He wasn't sure he wanted to resist anymore. The allure of power, of change, of something greater than the life he had built. It was intoxicating. But then, Emily's face flashed in his mind, the worry in her eyes, the way she had looked at him that morning. "What if I can't do this?" Jonah whispered, his voice trembling. "What if I can't walk away from her? From the life I've built with her?" Aeliana reached out and cupped his face in her cool hands, her touch like a balm. "You don't have to choose her over me, Jonah, but you must choose your true self. And your true self is not the man who lives in the shadows of fear and doubt. It is the man who will take the future into his hands and mold it to his will." Jonah's heart raced. He could feel it, the weight of the decision that was coming, the decision that would change everything. "I'm ready," he said, his voice barely audible. Aeliana's smile deepened, a mixture of triumph and tenderness. "Then let's begin." As the words left her lips, Jonah felt something shift within him. A spark, a light, a sense of power that surged through his veins, more intense than anything he had ever known. The future was no longer a distant idea. It was here, in his grasp, and it was his to shape. But at what cost? Jonah didn't know yet, and perhaps that was the most terrifying part. Jonah stood at the edge of the park, his heart pounding in his chest, his body vibrating with a strange, foreign energy. Aeliana stood before him, her hands still resting gently on his face, grounding him in the present. Everything about this moment felt like a dream, like a hazy vision that was both impossible and inevitable at the same time. His mind was a blur of conflicting emotions: guilt, fear, excitement, desire. But as Aeliana looked at him with those otherworldly eyes, a calm settled over him. She wasn't forcing him into anything. It was as though the choice had always been his. The path he was standing on had been laid before him long ago. He had simply needed to step into it. "I don't know if I can go back," Jonah whispered, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Aeliana smiled softly, understanding in her expression. "You won't need to, Jonah. You'll never truly go back to who you were before. Once you awaken, there is no turning away from the truth of who you are." The weight of her words settled on his shoulders, but strangely, it didn't feel like a burden. Instead, it felt like the shedding of a heavy cloak he had been carrying for too long. The life he had known, his apartment, his work, Emily. It all seemed so small, so insignificant in the face of this larger, cosmic calling. He had loved Emily, and he had believed, for a long time, that they were meant to be together. But now, standing before Aeliana, he understood something deeper. Love wasn't just about shared moments and familiarity. It was about growth. And the love Aeliana offered him was the kind that transcended space and time, a connection to something ancient and powerful. "Emily," Jonah's voice faltered. The thought of her, hurt and confused, twisted his insides. "I don't want to hurt her. She doesn't deserve this." Aeliana's gaze softened with something that felt like compassion. "You think you're the one hurting her. But the truth is, Jonah, you can't stay in a life that doesn't align with your true self. You can't be the man you're meant to be if you hold on to the past." Jonah closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. He thought of Emily's face, her eyes full of love and confusion, her quiet plea for him to come back to her. He could still hear her voice, still feel her presence. But it was fading now like a memory from another life. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Jonah admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I can't live up to this, to what you're asking?" "You don't have to be ready, Jonah," Aeliana said, her voice soft yet firm. "You already are." A wave of warmth washed over him, and suddenly, it was as if the universe itself was speaking through her. He felt a pulse deep within him, a resonance that reached into every part of his being. He felt alive in a way he never had before. "I've been waiting for you," she continued. "We've both been waiting for this moment. And it's not just about us, Jonah. It's about something much larger. Our child, the bridge between two worlds, the future we're creating together. You are a part of something that will change the course of history." Her words enveloped him like a spell, and Jonah felt himself drawn to her. She was right. This was more than just a choice between two paths. This was his destiny, and there was no going back. The shift inside him was unmistakable. It was as if his very essence had realigned, reshaped. He could see the threads of possibility, feel them vibrating around him like a symphony. He could hear them calling to him, beckoning him forward. Without thinking, Jonah stepped closer to Aeliana. His body moved with a newfound certainty, his hands reaching out to her, pulling her toward him. The kiss they shared was electric, intense, urgent, a merging of two beings, two worlds. As their lips met, it felt like the universe itself shifted, like a door had opened in his soul, and all the answers he had been seeking poured through. Aeliana's arms wrapped around him, pulling him closer. "This is only the beginning, Jonah," she whispered against his lips. "You will never be the same again, and together we will shape the future." As the kiss deepened, Jonah felt something stir inside him, something both terrifying and exhilarating. He was becoming someone new, someone who no longer fit into the confines of his old life. His body trembled with the power of it all, his thoughts racing as if they were trying to catch up to the changes happening within him. When they finally pulled apart, Jonah felt the shift in the air. He could feel it. Something had changed, something profound. He was no longer just a man. He was part of something greater, part of a cosmic plan that was beyond his comprehension. Aeliana smiled, her eyes glowing with pride and something else. Something ancient, something beyond human understanding. "The child is already inside you," she said, her voice a mere whisper. "The legacy begins now." Jonah's mind reeled. He hadn't expected it to happen this fast, hadn't imagined that the change would be so immediate. He felt different, stronger, clearer, as though he had awakened to a power within himself he hadn't known existed. But beneath it all, there was a tinge of fear. What did this mean for him? For Emily? But as he looked at Aeliana, he realized that he had already crossed the point of no return. There was no going back. And in some strange way, he was relieved. The uncertainty of the past few days had faded, replaced by a certainty he couldn't explain. "I'm ready," he said, his voice firm and steady now. "Let's begin." Aeliana's smile deepened, and she kissed him once more, as if sealing the promise of their future. She pulled away, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "The future is ours, Jonah. The world will never be the same, and we will be the ones to lead it." And as they stood together under the moonlit sky, Jonah felt the full weight of what he had just stepped into. The future was no longer a distant idea. It was here in his hands. And as terrifying as it was, he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just Jonah. He was the beginning of something far greater.